This podcast is very important to all Africans. The youths. U.S. African Leaders Summit, United States is simply countering China's influence in Africa. You are listening into a podcast from J.B. Mwangi. You need to cow that. America aims to pursue deeper diplomatic and commercial engagement with African countries to dilute China's rising influence on the continent. At the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden announced the dawn of a new era in U.S.-Africa ties, saying the U.S. is all in on Africa's future as it seeks to counter growing Chinese influence on the continent. The three-day summit, attended by African leaders from 49 countries, aimed at revamping the U.S. as a strategic partner to African countries amid competition with China. U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai said she wants to improve the continent's U.S. Trade Preferences program to boost investment. The Biden administration pledged $55 billion for food security, climate crisis and trade partnerships, in addition to a new agreement with the African Continental Free Trade Area that will give U.S. companies access to 1.3 billion people and a market valued at $3.4 trillion. The summit is the first of its kind since 2014 under then-President Barack Obama. Meanwhile, China has been holding the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation every 3 years since 2000. Widely seen as an essential means of advancing Chinese diplomatic and commercial interests. For nearly 2 decades, Beijing has plowed funds into African infrastructure and supplied the continent with affordable consumer goods, ranging from mobile phones and solar panels to plastics. Until now, Sub-Saharan Africa has always been a low foreign relations priority for the U.S., accounting for just 1.2% of its total two-way trade. However, Western leaders have sharply criticized what they see as Beijing's reluctance to address the heavy debt burden facing many African countries. Beijing's ambassador to Washington rejected the idea ahead of the summit, citing a report that African countries owe 3 times more debt to Western institutions while noting that Chinese-built hospitals, highways, airports and stadiums are everywhere in Africa. Can Washington close the gap? As the U.S.-China rivalry sucks the global economy and international relations into its orbit, the gap between Washington and Beijing's footprint on the African continent is stark. China-Africa trade accounts for $254 billion, 4 times that of U.S.-Africa, which stands at $64.3 billion. China is also the largest provider of foreign direct investment, double the level of U.S. FDI- and supports hundreds of thousands of African jobs. Beijing formalized commercial engagement with Africa in 2013 with the Belt and Road Initiative, a well-resourced effort to build political influence and grow commercial relationships throughout the developing world through Chinese infrastructure lending, construction and resource extraction. A survey conducted earlier this year found that 76% of Africans aged 18 to 24 view China as a positive influence on their lives, compared with 72% for the U.S. Further evidence that China is winning the battle for the hearts and minds of Africans. That is something U.S. observers are starting to take note of. Released in August, the Biden administration's U.S.-Africa strategy document highlights that with one of the world's fastest-growing populations, largest free trade areas by geographical area and most diverse set of ecosystems, African governments, institutions, and people will play a critical role in solving global challenges. The U.S. has contributed extensively to Africa over the past 3 decades, including forging partnerships that have assisted more than 20 million people living with HIV and electrified 29 million homes and businesses. But its efforts to promote democracy, peace and security have struggled to show the desired impact in recent years. Some of our long-standing approaches have become insufficient to meet new challenges in a more contested and competitive world, the document said. The U.S. government is committed to revitalize and modernize its traditional tools of statecraft to advance U.S. interests across a changing continent. The U.S. feels that China views Africa as an important arena to challenge the rules-based international order, advance its own narrow commercial and geopolitical interests, undermine transparency and openness, and weaken U.S. relations with African peoples and governments. After an 8-year gap, the first summit between the United States and Africa took place from 13 to 15 December. An opportunity for the White House to make amends and to take bilateral relations to a different level. In fact, U.S. President Joe Biden emphasized the importance of going beyond aid and spoke of a new matrix partnership for the 21st century, through which investments will be made to unleash the power of the private sector. Africa's economic transition depends on good governance, healthy populations, reliable and affordable energy, he said. These are the things the business community intends to invest in. In total, almost $15 billion US, 14 billion euros, in contracts and commitments between private companies have been concluded. At a business forum with representatives of 300 American and African companies, the president spoke about the expansion of road networks, the internet and renewable energy, and announced that trade relations would be significantly strengthened. Another key item on the agenda of this new era on the African continent is a new agreement with the African Union, AU, member states, the African Continental Free Trade Area, concluded in 2018, which is expected to concern 1.3 billion people over 8 years. This new era in African-American relations opens not least as a reaction to a Chinese influence on the continent that has seen exponential growth over the past 15 years. As pointed out by Lloyd Austin, U.S. Secretary of Defense, China is expanding its footprint on the continent on a daily basis, and this could have a destabilizing effect. China has indeed been omnipresent in Africa for a long time. Chinese companies are building roads and railways locally, sourcing raw materials, buying up farmland, producing textiles, investing in the music industry and shipping large numbers of smartphones to Africa. China's trade volume with Africa is 4 times that of the United States. The economic relations are therefore close and diverse. And this is exactly what is often viewed very critically in the European Union. Beijing is allegedly pushing countries into a debt trap. The country is allegedly destroying the environment on the continent, for example through mining, while offering poor quality and construction projects. One strategy China is using to score points in Africa is to act instead of argue. This is shown by a study commissioned by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. In it, most of the 1,600 African decision makers interviewed praised China for its speedy decision-making, ability to implement projects quickly and non-interference in domestic political affairs. This year, the U.S. government has felt the geopolitical price of leaving the continent to other powers. When, in the spring, after the Russian attack on Ukraine, Biden tried to convince the international community to isolate Moscow politically and sanction it economically, he was met with reluctance in many African countries, and sometimes even rejection. When the UN General Assembly condemned Putin's war, many African member states abstained. Washington wants to learn lessons from this. Some countries on the African continent refuse to choose allies between the two powers. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame declared during the summit that the US-China rivalry is none of their business. African leaders remain lucid about the limitations facing their economies. Development cannot come only from investments in infrastructure and basic development needs, said Patrice Talon, president of Benin. For growth to be real, we need private sector investment. At the beginning of the meeting, the Biden administration pledged $55 billion in funds to African states, among other things to tackle the food crisis and the consequences of climate change. The president is also expected to support the political initiative to make the AU a permanent member of the G20. Mali, Guinea, Sudan and Burkina Faso were not invited to Washington. The AU suspended its membership due to military coups. Eritrea is also absent because the U.S. does not maintain normal diplomatic contacts with the country due to the armed conflict with Ethiopia. Thanks for listening to this podcast from J-Beam Hwangi. For more of the kind, search for J-Beam Hwangi podcasts on all platforms including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, his website www.jbeamhwangi.com as well. You can find a playlist of these podcasts on his YouTube channel in the name J-Beam Hwangi.